Story 1, The Hitchhiker. My name is Rachel, and I still can't forget the night I drove through the mountains of Colorado. I was on my way back from a friend's wedding, and it was late, around midnight. The highway was deserted, with only the occasional truck passing by. The moonlight barely illuminated the winding road ahead of me. As I drove, I felt a sudden chill in the air. I glanced at the dashboard and noticed the temperature had dropped significantly. Shivering, I turned up the heat and focused on the road, trying to shake off the uneasy feeling that had settled over me. I was about 50 miles from the nearest town when I saw a figure standing by the side of the road, thumb outstretched. Against my better judgment, I slowed down. As I got closer, I could see it was a man, dressed in a tattered coat and jeans. He looked cold and desperate. I rolled down my window slightly. "Need a ride?" I asked cautiously. "Yes, please," he replied, his voice barely audible. I unlocked the door, and he climbed into the back seat. As he settled in, I caught a whiff of something musty and old. I tried to ignore it, focusing instead on getting back on the road. "Where are you headed?" I asked, glancing at him in the rearview mirror. "Just down the road a bit," he said, his eyes hidden in the shadows. I nodded and drove on, the silence between us growing heavier with each passing mile. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off about him. He sat too still, too quiet, and the hairs on the back of my neck stood on end. After a while, I noticed movement in the rearview mirror. I looked closer and saw the man shifting in his seat, his eyes fixed on me with an intensity that made my skin crawl. I tried to stay calm, reminding myself that I was probably just being paranoid. "What's your name?" I asked, trying to break the silence. He didn't answer right away. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and eerie. "You can call me John." I nodded, gripping the steering wheel tighter. "I'm Rachel." We fell back into silence, and I couldn't help but glance in the mirror every few seconds. Each time, John seemed to be watching me, his eyes dark and unblinking. I started to regret picking him up, but I didn't know how to get rid of him without making things awkward or dangerous. Then, out of nowhere, John leaned forward and whispered, "You should have left me on the side of the road." My heart skipped a beat, and I felt a wave of panic wash over me. "What do you mean?" I asked, my voice trembling. "Because now, you're stuck with me," he replied, his breath cold against my neck. I slammed on the brakes, my car skidding to a halt on the empty highway. I turned around to confront him, but the back seat was empty. My heart pounded in my chest as I frantically searched the car, but there was no sign of John anywhere. I sat there in the middle of the road, trying to make sense of what had just happened. Had I imagined the whole thing? But the lingering scent of musty clothes told me it was real. Shaking, I got back on the road and drove as fast as I could to the nearest town. I checked into a motel and locked myself in the room, too scared to sleep. The next day, I reported the incident to the police, but they found no trace of anyone matching John's description. The experience left me deeply unsettled. I avoided driving alone at night for a long time, and when I did, I constantly checked my back seat, haunted by the memory of the mysterious hitchhiker who had vanished without a trace. Story 2, The Shadow in the Back Seat. My name is Tom, and I'll never forget the night I saw something that changed my life forever. I was driving home from a late shift at the factory, exhausted and eager to get some sleep. It was around 2 a.m., and the highway was eerily quiet. The only sound was the hum of my car engine and the occasional rustle of wind. I had been on the road for about an hour when I started to feel uneasy. It was that inexplicable feeling you get when you know you're being watched. I glanced in the rearview mirror, expecting to see nothing but darkness. Instead, I saw a shadowy figure sitting in the back seat. I nearly swerved off the road in shock. My heart raced, and my mind struggled to comprehend what I was seeing. I blinked a few times, hoping it was just a trick of the light, but the figure remained. It was dark and indistinct, like a silhouette, but there was no mistaking it. Someone or something was in my car. I took a deep breath, trying to calm myself. "Who are you?" I demanded, my voice shaking. There was no response. The figure didn't move, didn't speak. It just sat there, an oppressive presence that filled the car with dread. I considered pulling over and getting out, but the thought of being alone on the side of the highway with whatever this was terrified me even more. I kept driving, my eyes darting between the road and the rearview mirror. Every time I looked, the figure was still there, unmoving. My mind raced through every possible explanation. Maybe it was a prank, maybe I was hallucinating from lack of sleep, maybe. Suddenly, the figure leaned forward, its face coming into the light. My blood turned to ice as I saw its eyes, dark, empty voids that seemed to suck in all the light around them. It opened its mouth, but no sound came out. Instead, I felt a wave of cold wash over me, like the breath of death itself. "Get out!" I shouted, my voice cracking with fear. "Leave me alone." The figure didn't move, didn't react. It just stared at me with those soulless eyes, and I felt my sanity slipping away. Desperation took over, and I floored the gas pedal, hoping to outrun whatever nightmare had invaded my car. As I sped down the highway, the figure slowly faded away, becoming less distinct until it vanished entirely. I kept driving, my hands gripping the wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. I didn't stop until I reached my driveway, my body trembling with exhaustion and terror. I stumbled out of the car and ran into the house, locking the door behind me. I collapsed on the couch, trying to make sense of what had just happened. I wanted to believe it was a hallucination, a product of my tired mind, but the fear and the cold I felt were all too real. The next day, I checked my car, looking for any sign that someone had been there, but there was nothing. No footprints, no fingerprints, nothing to suggest that anyone had been in the back seat. I tried to put it out of my mind, but the memory of those empty eyes haunted me. I started avoiding late-night drives and made sure never to look in the rearview mirror for too long. The experience left me shaken and paranoid, always on edge. Even now, years later, I can't shake the feeling that something is watching me, waiting for the right moment to return.